In this video, I wanted to discuss the differences between Metro 2033 the novel and the video game, as seeing the release of 2039 is in the not so distant future. I wanted to revisit the game given that it's been a very long time since I played it. That was when it was free around December 2012 or so, and well, their generosity worked. So many years later I played all the games, and now I finally decided to pick up the books and read through it. Now, this is the Redux version of the game, also because, well, I never played this version, so I figured, why not? I know it's not exactly the best experience you can get in many aspects in its tone and atmosphere, but I figured, might as well. Also, spoilers, yeah? Two sorts, for the novel and for the game. Also, forgive my Russian pronunciations. I tried, but I'm not familiar with Slavic languages. So I wanted to compare the book to the game, particularly in the light of determining what sort of rationalities there can be when you essentially convert or borrow heavily from a book into a video game. What's there to say about a story about living in the metros concerning a post-apocalyptic Russia 20 years after nuclear fallout? As it says, the game is inspired by it and is definitely not one-to-one. What makes for a good video game isn't what makes for a good book and vice versa. As simply put, some things do not translate to the other medium smoothly. If this was the book, for instance, Artyom travels across 20 or so stations, basically eliminating only about a handful of mutants total and one human being. Not to mention, there are hardly any mutants that Artyom sees in the metro itself and beyond it, as it focuses heavily on exploration, the psychological, the occult, science fiction, and many sorts of scenarios that exist across the various stations, tunnels, and the surface that spans its 458 or so pages. Essentially, there must be concessions based on the strengths, weaknesses, and peculiarities that make the game the way it is, and I'd say overall it works reasonably well for a post-apocalyptic and story-based FPS, which is a real rarity nowadays. This is especially the case given that this is 4A Games' first story-based game endeavor, so take this video more so of how the details from the book serve as a supplement to distinguish the decisions made for the game. Although they are massively different, the game nonetheless still takes many relative constraints around the book that demonstrates how keen they were in creating an FPS game out of its source material. I'll point out some of my favorite things from the book, and what isn't there as it relates to the game chapter by chapter. Metro 2033 the game is supposed to be a standalone experience, but I think you would enjoy it a whole lot more if you read the book in my opinion. Although, it's obviously missing so many elements of the book. Nonetheless, how it contextualizes itself relative to it is actually really impressive, as a surprising amount of it is at least considered. By the way, Game Artyom is the most unrealistic depiction of a 20-year-old I've ever seen, but that kinda goes without saying really for most video game protagonists. But I want to draw attention to the various notes and opening chapter statements of Artyom. They actually reflect his age quite well, alongside the probing or questioning nature he has that reflects book Artyom quite well. Albeit this is quite disconnected, I'd say, given the silent protagonist nature of the game. The monologues are an interesting choice that tries to provide more nuance and perhaps tries to tie Artyom closer to his book counterpart, but it doesn't really work in my opinion. What I want to stress foremost is the time budget associated with how a video game operates is far different from that of a book, of course. For most story-based FPS games, I would say they don't really last more than the 10-hour mark compared to however long you want to make a book. Making complex 3D models, storyboarding, and complications required to make a video game require lengthy pre-production efforts. So I view the game more as, how do we create the Metro experience given a certain time budget? To draw out elements that allude to its technical, philosophical, and political messages is often difficult if you only have a fraction of the time to express it, as the book took me about a week to read while writing 30 or so pages worth of shorthand notes of stuff that stood out to me. That's about, I don't know, over 10 times the amount of hours to digest compared to the 8 hours or so I took to beat the hardcore difficulty. So yeah, if it's one thing I've noticed, that its time is absolutely of the essence. It is trying to be the best supercut of a medium that's based on reflection and analysis, which of course the video game version is likely going to struggle with, especially in its first real attempt. But it does a good job for what it is in its own way, especially given its morality system and two endings. So the start of the game, of course, is the decision of starting at a later point and then reverting back in time. This technique of media res was really common in the mid-2010s for storytelling, so consider it their hook or whatever. You see, Artyom isn't jumped by these novellas in this part of the story, and he's in a fire truck of all things with two others, Ulman and Pavel, in the novel. Nor is Artyom part of the Order. Artyom's role there is essentially a facilitator or lackey in helping Melnik, or Miller, in finding D6 and the conditions necessary to set up the missiles. And well, that role wouldn't make sense in the context of a video game. You, the player, have to make the important choices clearly. It reflects somewhat realistically that Book Artyom is, well, a 20-year-old without particular expertise or technical skills outside of his station's needs. The Spartan Order 2 isn't exactly what they appear to be as depicted as the noble-hearted who want to save the Metro. They are missing the other half Brahmins or librarians, no, not those ones, that make up the polis in this power struggle between strength and or knowledge. They don't have many action sequences in the book either, and those that exist are practically movie material trope stuff, albeit with some reasons of why it's so. The homegrown weapons are entirely the artistry of 4A games, as all of them are simply actual firearms in the book. Which, while nice, I think it makes more sense that created weapons would be more readily available. Also, they borrowed the idea of bullets as currency, which the standard dirty bullets, separated entirely for shooting, are a game convention, which is great too. I like the way the book puts it in chapter 5. The value of currency is relative to a person's life and has a negative ring to it. 100 grams of tea for 5 bullets or 5 lives, 15 for a sausage stick, and 20 for a pig leather jacket and so on. Oh right, their meals are almost exclusively pork, maybe rats, mushrooms, gruel, and if you're lucky, eggs, alongside a healthy dose of vitamin tablets. Yum yum. They even call their currency by affectionate nicknames, little bullets, like how Americans call the $100 bill a Benjamin. I wish they put more of those little details in the game for vendors. A cool change as well is that the bullets are possibly 7.62 by 39mm, or ammo used for the likes of the SKS, AKM or 47 models, and not the 545 x 39mm as you could see in game for AK-74s, as this likely is a limitation around making weaponry fit the same caliber. For example, they have a VSK-94 in the game which is supposed to use 9 x 39mm. It would likely be too complicated if you had to manage too many calibers and wouldn't fit with the fairly simplistic A to B style level design. There are no depictions of shotguns in the book either, as they're primarily automatics or whatever pistols, with a mention of a sniper rifle, which the diversity here is a no-brainer upgrade. Weapons also have no problem eliminating most mutants in the book, not even the librarians can survive. They also got actual light machine guns in the book, which I would love to see. But some of the largest differences compared to the game is that radiation is incredibly dangerous, as you'd basically die in a few moments without any protection, as they stress the need for radiation suits and not just the gas masses you see in game. It's reported in the book that they'd need about 50 years minimum if people wanted to return to the surface. The book also takes place sometime not in the winter, as they got a lot of weird mutant plant overgrowth, which the use of winter here is actually pretty cool as a striking contrast compared to the tunnels, but doubly serves as a way to circumvent design expectations and for optimization. There clearly won't be foliage in the winter, and it helps mask the lack of detail in these more open sections. Nuclear winters in the book are basically the you won't survive type conditions as well, and the lack of gloves here during these sections is kinda weird as it's cold even in the metro itself given its damp conditions. Also, since people have been driven to the metros, their eyes have been adapted to the dark now, which they'll be permanently blinded if someone were to be exposed to the sunlight. Even the camera flash temporarily blinds Artyom for 5 minutes in the novel. All of this would make zero sense of course for the game, and limits its environmental and level design choices, especially since the surface is almost entirely the domain of stalkers. It requires expertise to navigate its dangerous, strange, and sometimes paranormal conditions, such as staring at the Kremlin towers that leaves an individual seemingly spellbound and demands a minimum of 2 people. Essentially, the game cannot live off subtlety and attempts to fit in details of its source material when it doesn't clash with its onset of intentions, which is something I think many people don't understand, such as with TV conversions of other IPs, such as people's disappointments with how loosely the Fallout show fits the in-game lore. If they wanted to make more of the same, it would likely have zero creativity and no reason to exist. But I do think that the game is missing some important concepts that make Metro, Metro. There is this idea of the tunnel fear, or the pervasive feeling of psychological anguish physically and mentally manifested, which you feel that you're being watched even if there's nothing there. Sometimes silence is the worst part, as your mind may conjure things that may or may not exist, and you feel an overwhelming and irrational fear. And then a whiplash as you see anomalies that can't be physically explained while also having to deal with mutants that are trying to eat you as you pitifully try to exist. It's quite the multifaceted, depressing Eastern style of existential dread, tinged with science fiction that is so fantastically woven in the book that makes its way into the video game. Although it cannot match the book in both style and substance, it still very much goes out of its way to adhere to the constraints of the book in many ways, and therefore has the soul of the Metro experience that inherently makes it a favorite for many. The only complaint I have is that one of the factions in both mediums, Hansa, or the American 1900s style of free market capitalism, is only really implied, as they don't focus on them here even though they play a crucial role in the novel. A shame, but their intentions are depicted similarly in the game. Their lack of presence is probably the one thing I'd probably say is the most confusing and quintessential element missing now that I've re-experienced it. What I want to draw attention to foremost is the book's idea of trained personnel, or these prestigious figures whose role in transitioning the Metro into nuclear fallout shelters in the early days and continued maintenance of such is a famous one, only lower than Stalker's. Suhoi is of course still Artyom's stepfather, but it doesn't draw upon the respect for his role as he doesn't don a uniform which they proudly wear. He simply wears a black trench coat, which is a shame for lacking some implicit storytelling. But speaking of stalkers, Game Bourbon later notes on with nonchalance at a dead stalker, who are noted as crazy devils. They are practically demigods in the book in relation to their importance, as it's not simply anything they can pick up, as their work is absolutely necessary for the Metro to function. They obtain wood, useful parts, oil and so on, as the game doesn't touch upon the generator systems that are necessary for the stations to function. The game more so borrows the Stalker game's idea of a stalker as an opportunist, which given the origins of 4A games, is actually a neat explanation if so. There is less logical binding so to speak, but I don't really find fault in this as too much detail in a way may ruin an experience. Anyhow, the first note of the level says that Artyom believes that Suhoi hopes in a miracle through Hunter, so the opening with Hunter is very dramatic with the pressurized door with the man himself. This conversation plays out similarly like in the book, where Suhoi hides his belief that humanity cannot withstand the Dark Ones, or even survive overall. The idea of misunderstanding, or the inability to understand, is central to the novel as separated settlements, represented as train stations, promoting tribalism and conflict even in the most dire and shared circumstances. Plato's cave allegory is probably one of the most important themes of both the book and the game in my opinion, especially in consideration of the role of the Dark Ones, whose intentions of aid are misunderstood. They are indeed homo novos, perfectly adapted to the conditions left from humanity's wake, but they desire a future together with them as they see the throngs of a dying civilization and want to help. But you know how that goes. But book Artyom doesn't know Hunter, as the effect of handing Artyom a New York postcard establishes an implied prior friendship. That is to expedite the pace of the game. It is worth noting that Artyom's adventure doesn't really start until chapter 4 of 20, or around 70 pages into the book, so lots of exposition is used there to build up his adventure and the dangers of the Metro. The book therefore gives you a taste of the circumstances rather than the visual medium that works so much more based on a blind first impressions. You can't really do the former for this genre of game, and while I do enjoy stuff like Half-Life 1's intro segment, I don't think most people would enjoy that as it's a poor use of the visual medium, and would represent an upper limit for most. But, since you also need things to shoot at because it's a FPS, this section of the game has no Salus enemies coming from the vents that serve as a great opener. The book notes, danger could hide above them, in the air shafts, or in the sides and multiple tunnel branches behind the sealed doors of former utility rooms or secret exits. Let's move on to the minecart section trip towards Riga or Rishskaya. The game tactically skips over Alexeyevskaya that would be in the book in favor of the juicier bits involving the paranormal between that station and Riga. Design-wise, the game skips over important concepts in the book, which is the idea of alliances between stations, and most importantly the idea surrounding communication. An important aspect is the lack of verifiable and accurate information, as getting from one end of the Metro to the other would take weeks, and that's not even accounting for the dangers and differences of factions that would dissolve any hope for accurate communication. Rumors and hearsay make up the basis of the game that provides so much lore to its paranormality and the indecipherable nature of the Metro. The changing of information as it's passed along is known as the telephone game, something you've likely experienced in school as a simple experiment. The Denha, or exhibition station that Artyom's caravan is from, is exactly here for that reason, to provide supplies to encourage alliances bookwise. They want to establish communication between stations that's missing, but the game uses this time instead for an NPC's exposition opportunity about the major factions in the Metro. I didn't know that Eugene is supposed to be Zhenya, or one of two of Artyom's childhood friends, which he envies for having his biological family in the book. Book Artyom has an adversity to rats as his mother loses his life due to a rat surge that overwhelmed his original station. In Metro Last Light, it's noted that he doesn't remember his childhood and he becomes aware of it, which lines up to the later written epilogue. Nikita and the unnamed commander are the others in the book, but we got Boris here. But it's cool how they added these subtle touches from the book, so you understand that while they could simply copy the book, it wouldn't make sense with its short and impactful nature, so they gotta cut things out of course. Anyhow, there are mutants here, and it would be hilarious if they had full-on AK-47s or RPD or RPKs, as it's implied in the book, so the Novalis wouldn't stand a chance. There's no physical resistance in the novel, however. Similarly, the Dark Ones attempt to contact Artyom here via the whispers in the pipes, but to no great effect compared to the vivid cutscene you get here. No one dies in the book at this point, so the NPC here serves almost as an intentional throwaway character that they don't have to expand. They arrive at Riga commenting on Artyom's good deed and celebrate similarly afterwards.
Let's train to our friend Artyom, who goes right through monsters and anomalies alike. To Artyom. To you!
I actually really like how they distinguish Bourbon here by making a minor character into a more important one that teaches Artyom the ropes. So in the book, he tries to covertly recruit Artyom after hearing that he's resistant to the whispers in the walls. And Artyom actually demands 2 full Kalashnikov magazines and food for the journey. He doesn't offer Artyom his AK at all either. Rather, Bourbon unexpectedly dies due to the paranormal voices in the tunnels leading to Sukhariskaya instead, as he mumbles some Dark One mind-controlled implications to steer Artyom in the right direction. So Artyom drags him in pure darkness towards that station, where he meets Khan, who tells him he might as well take his weapon. It is supposed to be a nice new one too, given its well-oiled condition and lack of wear interestingly, but the in-game one is junked by the game's standards as it has no attachments. I guess it's nice in getting a power spike compared to that dreadful SMG, but yeah, nice reference to the book actually. He does get the AK regardless. What is also a nice reference is Bourbon's questionable behaviors as he contacts Artyom away from the others to provide him this job opportunity to go to Sukhariskaya in the book, or known as locally as Dry Station in this game. But this is a serious departure from the book that notes bandits. Bandits are mainly implied there, but note their barbaric nature due to the various circumstances, which may include madness, incapability to fix their station's issues and therefore forcibly taking from others, or as groups that control other stations, such as the bandits imposing taxation in Kitai-Gorod in Chapter 7. Those are the only bandits that Artyom actually sees. So it's actually pretty cool to fight bandits, if you wish, as Artyom doesn't do so in the books. After this, the two navigate the tunnel sections to move past the train carts, and then the holdout section to Prospect Mira, or Market Station in the game, which is where they go in the book initially as well due to the tunnel complications.
Pleasure doing business with you. Alright. Just kidding.
No one. If anyone reads me...
Get ready, everyone! The gate's opening!
Are you sure, Commander?
Take your positions! Cover me!
This is Moscow.
I hate this so much.
Does anyone read me? Please respond. If anyone reads me...
Well, it looks quiet. Looks clear! Go!
But the most obvious change is going to the surface to get to Dry Station. It would be extremely boring to say the least if you were trapped in the tunnels for most of the game. I'm sure many people would like to know what the lived experience would be like in the metros, but surely no one would be really desiring to walk through linear tunnels for most of the game. So the surface introduces the flying creatures known in-game as demons or pterodactyls in the book, and the Novalis behavior of standing upright to smell the air to discern danger. Book Artyom only visits the surface twice and takes place around chapter 14 and near the end of chapter 19, or starting at nearly 2/3 into the novel with his joint venture into the Moscow State Library. Introducing the surface earlier is far more interesting and arguably the right choice in a visual medium compared to a written one, as I don't think many people would argue otherwise. How you navigate this and what the game decides here is essentially full-on 4A games. You take an alternative path as the way forward collapses and you must navigate around to regroup with Bourbon. The illusion of what once was is a really nice touch to the experience as it draws from the ideas of the book in this feeling of abnormal relief underground, as if they were experiencing what it was like on the surface before the nuclear fallout in chapter 7. Artyom moves across various buildings to regroup and fights a bunch more mutants with Bourbon as they make their way towards the metro entrance.
We're almost there. Just one courtyard left.
As Bourbon's life is extended a bit more, as they actually make it towards his goal, towards Dry Station, he becomes detained however by the same bandits he warns Artyom of, which is also a game invention. In the book, Artyom is dragging Bourbon's corpse as you meet Khan, who is also speaking in strange riddles and talks about how he's the last reincarnation of Genghis Khan. Apparently, he has the powers of limited foresight through his mysticism, and Dare recognizes Artyom through a dream similar to his, with the appearance of Hunter, which the early onset trip starting Artyom's journey is likely a reference to. Real swell guy, but yeah, the plot here differs massively as Khan falsely convinces people that they should leave as the plague from a nearby station may be here, and almost gets into a fight with Ace, a minor character who doubts Khan. It explores his role as someone who purposely provides false truths to force people to do things that they otherwise would not, and they need people to escape an anomaly in the next station. Anyhow, Bourbon meets his end here, and you meet Khan, who directs Artyom towards his next destination, which is Cursed Station.
You can keep your weapon down, young man.
Cursed Station is actually supposed to be Turgenevskaya, which the game differs massively, yet similarly in its expression of the occult or anomalies present, as it presents itself on the way there instead of the station itself with the train, Ghost Boy, soldiers, and finally the holdout section in which you see that electric anomaly. That's not in the book at all, and interestingly demonstrates the need to have elements that have an immediate shock factor. The conditions at Cursed Station are a holdout as you blow up various parts of it to stop those lurkers from coming, which is somewhat similar to the book's idea of collapsing tunnels as a last-ditch effort as well. The book's version of this probably wouldn't work, as it's about an almost psychedelic-induced travel that turns from pleasant to dread, with the complete lack of any sort of living life as they reach the station. The game draws similarly in utilizing anomaly, as there is a seemingly formless tornado that simply makes people vanish there. It's interesting as this affirms some rumors from Chapter 1 about disappearing people in Podistradskaya, which is somewhat referenced in the game with the scenario that a caravan of people can make it through that station, but a lone person cannot. They tried the same with Khan, but he makes a decision to take one path with the majority taking another. I wish that there was more of this in the actual game, but yeah, likely not possible to make it interesting in video game form at this point in time. What is here at Cursed Station is the last defense as the remaining guards of the station attempt to hold out to make sure that the people can get out okay. Khan then directs you to the next locale, which is the pathway towards Kuznetsky Most. Book-wise, they get separated before Kuznetsky Most at Kitai Korat as the local banditry is being gunned down by an unknown force. Everyone flees and Artyom is forced to go towards Kuznetsky Most. The in-game station is handled by the Red Line, or a communist-controlled area, which is not the case for in the books, where at that station, it denotes that they plant spies around to spread propaganda and the influence of communism as it's close to Red territory. This is the perfect place to put this faction game-wise, or it really would be like Hansa's treatment in the game, as the only other places that you see the Red Line are in the upcoming battlegrounds or as the prisoners you can help out later. The game introduces Andrew, who Khan tells you to seek out, as he would help assist you. He is an invention of the game, as there's no such character in the book like this, and provides a logical reason for how Artyom is able to evade the Reds. The book version is very interesting as you meet Porfovich and Vanichka. The former is an old man whose opinions about the Reds would lead to his capture, while Vanichka is a boy who has some sort of mental disability that renders him very animal-like and cannot speak. Their experiences explore how people are silenced by their opinions, as the three later escape on towards Pushkinskaya, which brings another evil. If people don't look a particular way that speaks to their idea of the Russian image, then the Fourth Reich Nazis will eliminate them. At this point, the game no longer really follows the spirit of the book, which is quite nice that 4A Games goes out of their way for around half of the experience to try to make it similar. So the game really is their interpretation at this point, I'd say, as naturally, if you're showing communists and Nazis, clearly, well, they're going to fight if they both believe in forcing what or who should be proper people. The novel doesn't focus on their wars. What better to show you how inhospitable the human condition is than murdering each other even in the most desperate of times. Artyom makes his way through, and he pushes through the war zone until you reach Fourth Reich territory. I couldn't find whether this aligns to the book, as this likely would be Pushkinskaya, where Artyom gets detained and tortured as they believe he's a Red spy. Artyom in retaliation kills the border Nazi who shoots Vanichka, and the old man is reported to be dead by their hands later, which leads to Artyom being put to a death sentence. How the Spartan Order saves you here is kinda cringeworthy, but hey, it's an old game and cutscene presentation wasn't their strongest suit. You're saved by Oman and Pavel, who are part of the Spartan Order, and Hunter's dog tags demonstrate your legitimacy to their mission. So I think at this point, the game kinda loses a lot of its book influences, which have been really strong up to this point, even if the details are still strongly considered.
I'd better take you to Miller. Whatever message you have, save it for him.
So, you try to escape in an armored vehicle with Pavel, which in the book is the first time Artyom sees a motorized railcart essentially, as there's more of a high-tech focus in the game. And you do get to Pavelitskaya by the end. I think most people would be bored to tears if people slept in tents and that most stations only had emergency red lights to conserve resources as they do in the book. I'd hate to play this game in an experience similar to Fallout 3's green screen filter, for instance. Oman just leaves for whatever reason, and it's an on-rail shooting experience so common in 7th generation games, which is similar but not in the book. The people who help Artyom bust out of jail there are defectors of the Red Line, realizing their own ideal communism and are 4 characters and not part of the Order. This is done of course to introduce you to the Spartan Order, earlier to close in on all the characters in the story as well. This is only about halfway into the book at this point. The game seems to speed up a lot to beeline towards the end at this point as a creative decision for a more shorter, more impactful experience, as you'll make it to the conditions of the game's interpretation of Pavelitskaya. So, this station is apparently overrun by mutants and you help the soldiers in a last stand effort to minimize the amount entering the overrun station. Afterwards, you encounter Sasha, a young boy who fell behind as his uncle was overrun by mutants, which Artyom helps him to reach the rest of the survivors through the ruins of their station. I think the aspect is pretty neat as the boy tells you things in your blind spots, and they are really busting out gimmicks at this point of the game. It tries to make up for the lack of plot elements for gameplay additions instead at this point. The last note for the defense level is actually an attempt to include Book Artyom's thoughts about what the currency's value means in its relativity to lives. Afterwards, you escape back outside for whatever reason, and wow, there's the Fourth Reich outdoors. It is interesting as a concept to fight human beings outside, but this doesn't happen at all in the book, as people's existence on the surface will attract every mutant in the metaphorical tri-state area to eat them, never mind the gunfire. For gameplay purposes, the game has been swapping between mutant and human scenarios, as you fought mutants in the metro and on the surface, but only humans in the tunnels prior to this point. It also serves to mesh both sorts of scenarios of mutants and humans together. And it also puts a unique gimmick of heavy winds disrupting your aim here as well, maybe to encourage stealth more. This decision for the topside alters some of the best sections of the book, which involves Artyom's experience in Hansa territory. Pavelitskaya isn't overrun here and he gets to experience the first signs of mutants trying to break into a station by its proximity to the surface, which is utilized in the game as you can see. But book-wise, normal mutants aren't a problem, and the proximity to the surface irradiates the people here, and the book puts an interesting spin. The Fourth Reich, who are rather close by, would absolutely be opposed to the people here, but necessity and reliance on the station to defend them from mutants is important aspects to its complicated relations. Similarly, Hansa provides them weapons and ammo, but not people for this purpose. In the game, the Order apparently takes care of mutants, which you don't see how the factions compromise with each other, or the detail of Hansa and the Red Line's post-war agreements in the very first chapter that is reminiscent of the Cold War. Book Artyom is lost at this point in his journey as he doesn't know how to advance due to a lack of a passport to proceed through Hansa territory. He meets Mark, one of the guards there, and relays his circumstances. Mark in turn helps Artyom by betting both their labor, or 1 year of scooping excrement in a rat race in which Mark is betting his rat will beat the Hansa station leaders in this betting ring for these passes. And I just realized right now after several touch-ups to the script, that by rat race it likely refers to its metaphorical meaning as well. Well, this is to Artyom's surprise as he never agrees, but to Mark, this is the opportunity as selection into such a luxurious station is a problem. Even Artyom notes how grand and great their living standards are, based not on the need of hard labor, but that of trade and wit. Note that the Hansa leader objects to slavery as that was the original bet Mark appeals with, as they don't do that around here. Artyom also falls into pile poo-poo. No, I'm serious. It's sad, unintentionally hilarious, and morally degrading in a way that's such a shocker compared to things like anomalies, feuding tribes, existential dread, as Artyom gets to experience being a pariah or a social outcast. In that time of scooping poo, Artyom notes how such grand consumption also creates waste, literally and metaphorically, as if to critique how such a capitalistic system is prone to the need to maintain its lavishness with its unwelcome byproducts. Mark cheers Artyom up by telling him to shoulder on, it's worth the cost, but Artyom becomes so mentally trapped with his labor that only by accidentally falling into poo-poo does he realize the futility of his circumstances, as he forgets his mission. Wake up and smell the, not the roses. The book really likes to dip its fingers in drawing attention to many aspects of the modern human condition, to say the least. This would be really hard to execute and likely not the focus of what the game designers would likely want the game to be. It would be entirely too lengthy as well, as it would also have to explore Artyom's stinky nature of how he can walk through 2 additional stations while suffering social alienation and ostracization. Or being recruited by Jehovah's Witnesses, who here exploit people who are at their lowest and convert orphans that can be easily indoctrinated. The most interesting in my opinion is the awesome may or may not be a real discussion he has with 2 individuals at Polyanka Station, known for its emptiness and hallucinogenic gas leakages before he reaches Polis. They discuss Artyom's assumption of the world as chaos or random strings of events versus the idea of fate, and it's really well done in my opinion. It gets a touch creepy too as they continue to discuss such matters after Artyom moves on, which is noted later that such experiences are visions that not everyone sees. He then gets to Polis. As you can see, the whole lead up to Polyanka, or Black Station in this game, is the path from outdoors to the Righteous headquarters and navigating that to reach Oman so he can get you to Polis. It's not really possible, I think, to incorporate Hansa in the game, as those whole sequences or something similar would not fit the game, that it's about getting from one point to the next while trying for a shooter-first experience. Some games stylistically put segments that don't fit the rest of the mood of the game, and it often becomes a hassle. Think of Halo 1's The Library level, absolutely vital to its exploration of the Forerunners and demonstrates an intentional tonal shift, but many people dislike it. Or RE4 Remake's Ashley sections. Those type of things somewhat hamper replayability, something that Metro 2033's direction is trying to maintain, I'd say. Though they have the library in its 3 sections that are also not everyone's favorite here, it is placed nearly practically at the end of the game comparatively, and are pretty short. Okay, so after that you get to Polis, and the cutscene there implies Artyom's report about the Dark One's exhibition station, but without the Brahmins, and the council can't help his station just like the book. It is implied Artyom joins the Spartan Order here given his respect for them in the beginning of the game, and Miller, who is finally introduced to you, is here explaining what happened back to you. He just decides to help you as it's tied to their duty as opposed to protecting the Metro. I don't find this story technique of skipping the whole thing and deploying you to the Moscow State Library to be effective, but for the purposes of making a linear FPS that tries to keep up its momentum, I can't say I disagree at all with the choice. Given the lack of Brahmins acting as the other half or power balance between the Kshatriya and Polis, then this cuts down the complications of making an already different story. The Brahmins are part of the overall caste system they have at Polis, which interestingly, 18-year-olds must choose one of the 4 roles that they desire, and they cannot change it. Note that in the book, the Spartan Order itself is not mentioned, and its association to Polis is that of a group that has a say in its council that is noted in the later books. That is referenced in Miller's dialogue here, at least. Book Artyom is tasked to ask for Melnik at Polis, which he is actually on duty and could not meet him until a day afterwards. Instead, Artyom meets Daniel, a young Brahmin, in the meanwhile and kind of become fast friends as they are of similar age and share the hobby of reading. It leans into the occult elements as this is where Artyom receives visions about the Kremlin's towers that have an eerie glow, and he reads an alternative history which the Bolsheviks of Russia's history used the cult to summon demons via its star representing a pentagram. It's fascinating stuff that leans on the mystic, and most importantly, they speak on what the Brahmins are secretly seeking, the Book of the Future, the last of the trio that includes the past and the present, but those were lost in the nuclear war. They all represent the entirety of history. I think it's quite symbolic in a way that the nuclear war that sets up Metro 2033 erases the understanding of the past, and arguably the present as it depicts perhaps the idea that the present is lost as well, given humanity's incapability to stop killing each other. So the search for a future seems obvious. I can understand why these sorts of ideas were not considered, as they really wouldn't make sense as the game maintains clear and realistic objectives for its game design regardless of its occult elements. The Brahmins ask Artyom to find it after the council refuses to help him, and that's how you team up with Miller there. Game Artyom is trying to find the coordinates to D6 or Metro 2, a top secret facility located deep in the Metro that houses the missile installation somewhere in Kremlin Station. Apparently, the books are real in the Metro universe, as is depicted in the other short stories expanding its lore, but Artyom fails to find it. Daniel is the one who's supposed to give Artyom the location of D6 if he was successful in finding the book, as a reward that can save his station. Imagine that, a source of knowledge, and therefore power, that is more important than the perceived threat that could end the Metro. But after spending time with Artyom, he gives it to him anyway as he's dying by a librarian, a gorilla-like mutant. But yeah, there are supposed to be 4 people total for the expedition topside, and they don't conveniently leave you alone by your lonesome the way that they do in the game. Rather, the begrudging Miller, who questions why you agreed to the Brahmin's request, a stalker called Ten, and Daniel accompany you there. They combine the roles of Daniel and Ten as the in-game character Danila, which Daniel might just be the book translation, but it combines both of their roles given how Danila gets injured like Ten and must be transported to safety by Miller. The library level is alright as it tries to replicate the scenario from the novel, but it's kinda lacking actual books that make it a treasure trove of knowledge. Perhaps an artistic reinterpretation given how large portions of the building is exposed to the elements. Artyom notes the smell of the pages permeating the air that notes how many there are. Though, I find the overall experience of it far more interesting in the game as the librarians are no joke. They also added these vine creatures called liana that allude to the strange mutant plant growths overtaking parts of the library. The tension of running past librarians after some initial encounter segments is really well done. Although this takes place more so in what seems to be the basement or maintenance areas compared to rooms filled with books. Overall, Artyom's frantic escape is well realized here. I can remember why people didn't like this section back then, but this is very much the sort of experience book Artyom would be dealing with. It'd be a pretty bad FPS game if so, and walking simulator horror games weren't exactly at their peak popularity yet, as that would be around mid-2010s. I'd be curious what that would look like, however. Anyhow, after obtaining the D6 folder, you are saved in the nick of time from a librarian that ambushes you, which doesn't happen in the book. Oman isn't a jokester at all in the book, which I kinda like here given how on edge most of the characters are, though he gets kind of annoying. However, book Artyom meets back up in the library with Miller and Ten, which Miller tells Artyom how to get to another station, as the failure to obtain the Book of the Future likely would mean that the Brahmins would kill him. That's when you start seeing the behavior in those solid standing and sniffling behavior that the game uses, and that's around page 312, or nearly 2/3 into the novel. Artyom has to navigate to another station by himself, and hunkers down in his potentially pre-nuclear home, and takes a photograph of a mother and a 2-year-old Artyom, who may or may not be him. What a coincidence there. He makes a last-ditch effort to escape and finds Miller there as planned at Smolenskaya. I don't think a section of repeating what you just played with Bourbon would have been interesting as well. There really isn't a point. Instead, you're at a church that has holy powers or something that allows you to breathe without a gas mask on the surface. Khan is here too for whatever reason as he helped the Spartans find Artyom, and working in mysterious ways, he is here now to make you second guess your inclinations to stop the Dark Ones, which he doesn't show up at all in the book after Kitai Gorat. It is the setup that there is something beneath the surface trope of course, to hint that there is a hidden ending. Anyhow, Miller discusses the next steps with you. It's rather short like most of the connective tissue so to speak that links one chapter or portion to the next. A lot of that sort of, how did Artyom get there, is a missing or implied element of the game. However, that sense of travel in of itself is what makes the Metro experience so enticing. Think of the many passages of Lord of the Rings are dedicated to how Frodo and his companions travel. The sense of a journey is really strong in this novel as well, and likely why the train is such an important aspect of Metro Exodus. The next step of the game is to advance towards Metro 2, as you spawn in close by and get to use the flamethrower. Now, this is actually cool as one of the members in Miller's task force actually does have one, but it isn't used until later. So there are a total of 6 Spartans here by the way, which actually lines up to the total number of guards that is present in the book when they reach Metro 2 if you include Artyom, who's now a Spartan. That's a really awesome attention to detail if that's deliberate. In the book, the location of Metro 2 is hidden around the segments relating to the cannibals of the seemingly sealed areas at Park Pipeti. They don't come up in this game, but if you played Exodus, then you know that they couldn't pass up on including cannibals in some fashion. 2 of the guards die as the cannibals use poison darts there, but yeah, you fight through several checkpoints of mutants to get to your destination here. The cannibals demonstrate a scenario perhaps why sometimes false truths or religion is a necessary element for people, as it provides motivation and reasoning for existence which people find without such, they have no purpose. They believe in the Great Worm, which, while unbelievable, it is intentionally used as an example based on how its creator, an old man who was a student of psychology and philosophy before the war, rationalized religion. He converts the cannibals with this religion to reduce the viciousness of their behavior so that one day, they might realize how awful it is and hopefully will no longer do so. He teaches them that eating other humans is a sin, but attempts to divert it so they only eat their enemies while sparing children, as they are sinless. The whole idea has to do with how the Metro, besides them, are residents of the machines, or those associated with pre-war, are inherently evil and are therefore responsible for the awful conditions which everyone finds themselves in. By forcing this religion as a reality, the old man believed that in religion is the performative that naturally leans towards goodness as dogmatically prescribed. A particularly powerful quote from the book is as follows: "What else could a man who has never seen anything except the Metro believe in?" I very much doubt that this could be meaningfully portrayed in the game. If you know your philosophy, this is formally known as something like Pascal's wager that explores that the belief in God provides benefits that far outweigh not believing. Assuming God doesn't exist, then the mild consequences of living a pious life is a meager detriment, while those that do believe, regardless if God exists or not, will benefit in some manner. However, the old man says he doesn't care whether or not he believes in the religion itself. It doesn't matter as long as others believe, and therefore shapes more practical aspects that allows them to survive. Metro Exodus also delves into these sorts of philosophical topics with the Spartan Ranger Idiot's dialogue, who, ironically to his name, is actually quite intelligent. How this strange episode comes up is that Artyom can't join Miller and a guy called Tretyak, a missile man or military personnel knowledgeable about such systems, as Artyom doesn't have a passport, so he can't travel with them. So he explores the station he's stuck at, Kievskaya, in the meanwhile, and finds out the true cause of the rumored missing people here associated with the infamous Park Pabeti station. Artyom gets captured alongside Anton, one of the commanders at Kievskaya, who's anxious that his child is missing. The cannibals imprison them to become their feast, but are rescued by Miller's new 8-person force, and immediately go with them to find D6 at the station, as you see here now. Somehow, they know how to restore the power in the game, which doesn't really happen in the book. So there, Anton is also conveniently a missile man, and Tretyak is killed by a cannibal's poison dart. The logic here clearly implies a niche technical knowledge to utilize the missile systems, but not here, however. It simply is implied that the order can make it work. So, none of the trains are running in the book, which again alludes to the higher tech focus here. As they're traveling downward, the biomass, as the thing is referred to as, is in the book as well. It's a shapeless, surging, watery mass that can move around, however, instead of whatever the scenario which Artyom and Miller find themselves in. To create a large, liquid-based physics entity with escape sections is likely not possible at this time. Instead, the game starts out with these creatures called amoebas, and then you do the crane minigame thing. But the book notes how they develop potential biological weapons here, and the allure of Kremlin Station and its beauty and whatnot may have been its psionic influence to draw unsuspecting people into their depths. This likely relates to the Kremlin Shining Towers that the book and game refers to, and whether or not the Kremlin actually exists or not. Nothing of the sort is expressed here, unfortunately, as the scenario is pretty much non-interactive against a stationary thing. After fiddling with some things to get the generator power online, you gotta play some silly minigame to pull up the 4 cells to power the reactor. Ulman is staying behind with Vladimir, the technician of the crew for whatever reason, and is the last you see of him in this game. Note in the book, the entire area is a mystery as no one has actually stepped foot here given the floor's dust layers in Kremlin Station, and they have to figure it out. The characters here know exactly where to go and how to get what they want as it skims over all the in-betweens. Somehow, this leads up to the surface afterwards with Miller that begins the game, and the final moments that are a straightforward rush towards Ostenkino Tower. In the book, Artyom, who is 20 years old, has never seen or heard of this place prior and has no idea how to operate or utilize any of this. So Miller divides the group to himself and others to the missile system, while Artyom and Ulman go back outside. So Artyom can provide assistance to Ulman, who's the one noting the coordinates for the missiles, as I doubt Artyom would know how to do this. So that's what I meant by an unrealistic 20-year-old. You meet Pavel on the surface, who is the guy who dies to mutants after rescuing you after the rail shooting part, and is the same Pavel of the 20 last pages of the book. Anyway, they go towards 2 other stations prior to this and learn of the poor conditions of Exhibition Station, which prompts him to urge Ulman if he can go back, as it's likely the last time Artyom will ever see his station again, which he agrees. Ulman also provides him with a wristwatch to make sure Artyom can make it on time, which is the first time he actually uses one, or nearing the end of the book at chapter 19. The game has the last of their group fighting it out against the mutants as Artyom and Miller rush towards the tower. It's worth noting how much effort it takes to bring the radio system they have. It has to be split and carried amongst the three characters as they walk up around 500 meters of stairs. There's absolutely no way that this would be represented in the game, so this version of Miller reversing the elevator system is the game's elegant solution. It would be hilarious if they had something akin to Final Fantasy VII Remake's 59 Flights of Stairs shenanigans, as they could have incorporated the Dark One's more frequent messaging to Artyom there, similarly to the book's approach. Since he is closer to the source of the Dark One city, which he actually does see in the book as some convulsing biological structure, they can link to his mind more easily. He rejects this as his dreams become repeated with this dark tunnel wherein the Dark Ones contact him, and he always panics as he's too scared to proceed. This is somewhat represented after the part in which Miller tells you to go on without him in the game, as you'll have that moment of trying to evade the Dark Ones. This ends up with how Artyom takes Hunter's metaphorical gun to shoot the Dark Ones chasing him, so Artyom can stop their mental infringement onto his consciousness. This plays more on the idea that even Artyom himself doesn't understand the Dark One's intentions, as bookwise, they lay out what is the truth of the matter telepathically to him. They are benevolent creatures that wish to share a future with humanity, and see Artyom as the chosen one to bridge the connection between their species, given how he had originally opened the station to the surface originally. The Dark Ones have been steering him away at many times from danger and supported him, which is why this unlikely journey of his with so many coincidences have been possible. Unfortunately, this mutual understanding is cut short as Ullman has already established the coordinates and they were just simply waiting for Anton to utilize the missile system. So, Artyom's acceptance and willingness to finally accept his role is all for naught. This is somewhat alluded to in the game's canyon ending as Artyom's ending dialogue after destroying the Dark Ones notes his hesitation, but it brings such a strong message in the book. It essentially demonstrates that, at least in my opinion, if humanity was collectively given a choice by other greater beings to save them, not only would they reject and spit in their metaphorical faces, but would consider it a reason to fight them. There can be no understanding, no rationality, or acceptance as the biases ingrained into them are those that mirror the pre-war assumptions. Therefore, there can be no miracles, as they would never even imagine accepting it in the first place. The epilogue of the book notes how disgusted Artyom is at his own actions and feels as if he personally murdered them. The game is a bit more lighthearted in that respect, as it gives humanity one last chance, a last light if you were, that is the next game's focus. The Gospel according to Artyom is the follow-up epilogue for the 2033 book and kinda ties in how Last Light works. Artyom is disgusted at being treated as a hero and simply wishes to disappear. He's conflicted as he cannot tell anyone of the truth about the Dark One's willingness to help them, and sees that it would be entirely futile to try to do so. And it goes over what happens in his childhood, as it sheds light on meeting with a Dark One in his childhood, and a small child one pulls D6 missiles, which sets up important plot aspects of the next game. So the 2033 and 2034 book start out as its own thing, and becomes influenced by the plot points of the game that makes up 2035. It's kinda weird, but hey, that's alright. But that's the end of the video. There's so much more to the book than what I've mentioned here, and I highly encourage you to read the book if you haven't. It's amazing, and I'm disappointed in myself for not trying it earlier. It surprises me a lot on how it expresses itself and reminds me a lot of my experiences reading other pieces of Russian literature, like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. Not in prose or style, but in terms of intentionality and how it gets there by alluding to metaphysical elements without actually explicitly stating it. Metro 2033, both in the book and video game form, is really great. The game not so much, as it's pretty rough at places, but it gives it that old school charm, and most importantly, it has a lot of heart. Thanks for watching, and I would really appreciate it if you subscribed and let me know your thoughts on Metro 2033 and the series in its entirety.
Will defeat his enemies. I led my war protecting my family and friends, protecting my home, the Metro. We had won. But to this day, I wonder, when we burned the Dark Ones from the face of the earth, was something lost as well?